Imagine an environment where, everyone has a genius level IQ.
Right. The absolute top tier.
Yeah, access to every academic resource imaginable and this culturally assumed just guaranteed ticket to the Ivy League.
It looks like the perfect setup.
You'd think so.
Yeah.
You put the highest performing kids in the optimal environment, you give them the best teachers, and what
The
happens?
burnout rate is just staggering.
It really is. Today, we're looking at why putting hyper-driven individuals into what looks like a perfect launch pad often results in, well, psychological collapse.
Which is such a fascinating paradox.
Welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. We're unpacking a genuinely fascinating document titled What a Boarder Can Learn from Laurie Santos.
And it is a remarkable synthesis. I
Yeah.
mean, the source material takes the really heavy-hitting behavioral science of happiness,
Mm.
specifically the pioneering research of Yale professor Laurie Santos,
Mm.
and applies it directly to the incredibly intense, highly pressurized ecosystem of elite boarding schools.
Right.
It basically treats these campuses as a microcosm for high-achievement culture everywhere.
And the mission of our deep dive today is to explore how that specific science can help students navigate academics, friendships, and, their own personal growth.
Exactly. It's about surviving that environment.
But I want to make something crystal clear to you listening right now. Even if you haven't seen the inside of a classroom in 20 years, or you've never stepped foot on a boarding school campus in your life, do not tune out.
Please don't.
Because the psychological principles we are exploring today offer an absolute masterclass in managing high expectations and extreme pressure in literally any environment.
Yeah, the boarding house here is really just the laboratory. The behavioral findings apply to anyone, any adult trying to balance high performance with actual sustainable human contentment.
Which is incredibly hard. Okay, let's unpack this. If we're going to use boarding school as our laboratory, we really need to understand the volatile conditions of that lab.
We do.
I like to compare boarding school to a pressure cooker. I mean, it is this incredibly concentrated environment where you are learning to manage your independence, your social life, and an unrelenting academic curriculum all at exactly the same time.
And you are doing it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Right. There is no physical off switch to just escape your colleagues or your work.
And that lack of an off switch exposes the foundational premise of Laurie Santos's work, as outlined in the text. When you are trapped in that pressure cooker, your baseline assumptions about how human motivation works are just tested to the breaking point. There is this massive fundamental disconnect between what our brains think will make us happy and what actually generates long-term satisfaction.
We think we want the prestigious outcome, like the trophy at the finish line.
Exactly. But the outcome doesn't actually satisfy this psychological hunger.
Right. So to really understand how to be happy in a high-demand setting, we first have to deconstruct this massive misconception these students face.
The text identifies this as the achievement trap.
Which is everywhere.
Oh, everywhere. Students operate under the illusion that high grades, awards, or institutional recognition are the absolute keys to happiness. They think they will finally feel secure when they hit those external metrics.
Suffer now, get the A, and then you can finally relax and be happy.
Yes. But Santos's research completely dismantles that script. The science proves that well-being is actually driven by habits and mindset, not by discrete outcome.
Because the human brain adapts so incredibly fast, right?
Right, hedonic adaptation. You get the A, you feel a massive dopamine spike, and 48 hours later, your brain's baseline resets.
And you're just stressed about the next test again.
Precisely. In a boarding environment, avoiding this trap means valuing effort over results. It means recognizing your long-term personal progress and actually appreciating positive moments in everyday routines. Success and well-being are connected, but they are not identical.
But wait, isn't the entire point of an elite education to achieve?
Well, yes.
I mean, if you tell a high-achieving student to stop focusing on their results, won't they just lose their competitive drive?
That is such a common reaction.
Right. Won't their GPA just tank?
It's a totally fair question, but the source resolves this pushback beautifully. Explain that focusing only on performance brings this immense, unnecessary pressure.
It's a biological threat to them.
Exactly. Ironically, prioritizing well-being is what allows students to sustain their motivation for much longer. If your entire self-worth is tied to a grade, a difficult exam triggers a fight-or-flight response.
Which literally shuts down the problem-solving part of your brain.
Yes, the prefrontal cortex goes offline. That kind of brittle, high-stakes pressure leads to burnout, not sustained excellence. By focusing on well-being and the learning process, you build cognitive endurance.
So individual achievements and grades aren't the primary engine for long-term satisfaction.
No, they're really not.
So what actually moves the needle? Because the science in the text points directly away from the individual and toward the community.
It does. One of the strongest findings in all of well-being science is that supportive relationships contribute significantly to happiness.
We are pack animals, after all.
We really are. And boarding houses are unique here because they provide daily, built-in opportunities to build meaningful connections.
Think about it. You're living in a dorm with your peers 2024
It's intense.
It's almost like a reality show, but instead of trying to win a prize, you're trying to pass calculus.
That is the perfect analogy.
So how do students move from merely, coexisting in this reality show to actually leveraging this proximity for their well-being? Because just sharing a bathroom doesn't magically make you supportive friends.
No, it definitely doesn't. And what's fascinating here is that proximity alone isn't enough. In fact, being surrounded by highly stressed peers can just make you more stressed.
Oh, emotional contagion. You just absorb their panic.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So to turn a shared living space into a genuine support system, it requires intentional actions. The text points out that boarders strengthen their well-being by actively investing time in friendships.
Even when they feel like they don't have the time.
Right. It means showing kindness and inclusion, participating in community activities, and this is key, communicating openly when challenges arise.
Which brings us to the reality of the friction in these spaces. Because living closely with others and studying constantly naturally leads to friction.
Inevitably.
So how do students maintain their well-being when reality gets difficult or discouraging or just incredibly stressful?
Well, the first step the source outlines is managing the danger of false expectations.
Mm-hmm.
Students often imagine that boarding life should feel easy or constantly enjoyable, so when it isn't, they get deeply discouraged.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because we are totally conditioned by pop culture to expect these life chapters to be a fun movie montage.
Oh, absolutely. The perfect study group, the laughing in the dining hall.
Right. But the reality includes the completely unglamorous Tuesday night cram sessions. You're exhausted, the chemistry homework makes no sense, and your roommate is breathing too loudly.
And if you expect the movie montage, that Tuesday night feels like a catastrophic failure.
So how do they handle that?
By understanding that growth inherently involves discomfort. This helps students accept temporary setbacks. It builds patience, helps them focus on learning over comparison, and builds long-term confidence.
But even with good expectations, that Tuesday night is still hard. The text talks about a specific tool for this, right?
Yes, gratitude. Practicing gratitude builds emotional balance and resilience.
Which sounds a little like toxic positivity to some people, I'm sure.
I know, but it's not. It looks like reflecting on small daily successes, appreciating peer or staff support, and actively keeping perspective during setbacks.
So it's not ignoring the bad stuff.
Not at all. Practicing gratitude and balanced expectations doesn't magically remove challenges. Instead, it provides the emotional stability needed to manage those challenges constructively.
It's a cognitive shock absorber.
That's a great way to say it.
Okay, so we now have the right mindset, we have the focus on relationships, and we have realistic expectations for hardship.
The whole psychological foundation.
But how is this philosophy actually sustained physically and practically on a day-to-day basis? Because you can't just think your way out of biology.
No, you really can't. The source material is very clear. Well-being is not an occasional monumental effort. It is shaped by repeated daily actions.
The actual architecture of your day.
Exactly. There are specific healthy habits required for mental well-being in boarding settings. We're talking about consistent sleep routines, physical activity, time away from digital distractions.
Oh, the phones are a huge one.
Huge. Plus, structured study schedules and dedicated opportunities for relaxation and reflection.
So what does this all mean for you in the real world? I mean, it's easy to be grateful and patient when you're perfectly rested.
Yeah.
But when you're sleep deprived and glued to a digital distraction, all of this high-minded philosophy goes completely out the window, right?
Oh, completely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the source grounds happiness in very physical realities. You literally cannot outthink a lack of sleep or constant digital distraction.
Your brain just doesn't have the fuel.
Right. When you are sleep deprived, your emotional regulation is biologically impaired. So boarding environments require students to actively build this daily architecture to support their academic and personal development simultaneously.
You have to protect your sleep like it's a core class you need to graduate.
You really do.
Yeah.
Because without it, the relationships, the gratitude, the mindset, it all just collapses.
So let's pull all this together. Happiness is not a prize that appears only after success.
Right.
It grows through everyday habits, positive relationships, and balanced expectations.
And mastering these skills in boarding school leads to managing pressure more effectively everywhere else. It leads to improved relationships, stronger motivation, and emotional resilience.
Skills that support not just educational success, but long-term life satisfaction.
Exactly. It reminds us of Santos's ultimate point. Well-being is not an innate trait. It can be learned and practiced. Boarding life is just the ideal laboratory for it.
And it forces you to practice it.
It does. So considering all of that, what stands out to you in all of this?
It's such a great question for our listeners to reflect on. Which of these levers are you pulling and which ones are you ignoring?
Exactly.
And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought today. We've talked about boarding school as this intense laboratories, right?
Mhm.
If boarding school forces you into a tight-knit community where you constantly practice the skill of well-being alongside others, how might we recreate that intentional, supportive boarding house community in our own scattered, independent adult lives to keep our own well-being in check?
That is the real challenge for all of us.
It absolutely is. Thank you so much to everyone listening for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you take these insights into your own daily routines wherever your pressure cooker happens to be.
Thanks for listening. Take care, everyone.